Hello, mighty men of God, and welcome to the Real Men Connect podcast, where we help good men become great men God's way. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Martin, and every week we interview some of the nation's most respected and accomplished men of faith to find out what it really takes to become the kind of husband, father, and spiritual leader God called and created us to be. And each interview session is packed with practical, proven biblical principles you can immediately apply in your relationships, on your job, and in your community. Guys, today we have with us Dr. Brad Ballard. And Dr. Brad Bellard is a faith-based purpose and performance strategist for men. And he helps high-achieving professional men pivot from an unfulfilling career to pursue their calling so they can live a life of significance and impact. And through his coaching program and his best-selling book and online show, he equips men with the clarity and confidence needed to go from stuck in their current work to fulfilling their God-given purpose and greatest impact on the world. And Dr. Brad is also a double-boarded sports medicine physician. He has worked with multiple professional teams, including serving as an assistant team doctor for the NBA Dallas Mavericks. And he's married to his beautiful high school sweetheart, Christina. Together, they have 3 children. And guys, I reached out to Dr. Brad because I guess it was maybe a couple of weeks ago, I posted a question in our Real Men University private Facebook community. And the question was, what do you think it would take to effectively fight racism in America? And this was shortly after the George Floyd incident. And as you guys can imagine, we see quite a few interesting comments, should I say. But it was Dr. Brad's comments that stood out to me as a leader of all men, not just black, but white men as well, that really struck a nerve with me because God has given Dr. Brad a similar call for discipling, mentoring, and coaching men. So I asked Dr. Brad to appear on the show today, not so much to talk about what we do, but more so concerning the culture climate in which we find ourselves doing it in. And we're going to discuss the answers that he gave to that question, as well as talk about our own personal views and everything and our own personal experiences. So Warrior Nation, please join me in welcoming my brother in Christ and fellow soldier in the battle for men's soul, Dr. Brad Ballard. Welcome to the Real Men Connect podcast, Brad.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me, Dr. Joe. How are you doing, man?
And I'm doing fantastic. You know, we had a chance, Dr. Brad, to talk before we came on. And I guess we need to put this as a disclaimer on this episode with the Real Men Connect, that we are not experts. Now, when it comes to us working with men and discipling and mentoring and coaching men, that's our wheelhouse. That's what God has called us to do. God has equipped us to do. And we have a passion for it. But what we're talking about today is 2 of us getting together because we have to minister to men. And we minister to men, not only black men, but white men as well, Latino, Asian, you name it. We have the Rainbow Coalition in Real Men Connect. And so we have a huge responsibility on our shoulder, but we can't be silent about this. But what we can do is talk about it from our perspective and what we're dealing with. Because I think this also not only can help some of our black brothers out there who are listening, but especially to get some insight from some of our white brothers to say, wow, they're in that position. Man, that's what they're going through. Because it's easy for them to look at us and they see 2 brothers who are talking about this and they say, wow, they're living the American dream. They both highly educated. Mm-hmm. They both obviously have achieved some type of success in their life. And so I wonder what their take is on this. And I can't wait to share with, because we're sharing it from a Christian perspective. We have a biblical worldview of all of this. And we think that voice needs to be heard. And that's why I brought you on the show, because that's what resonated when I saw your comments. It was one of the few. And I'm excited about having you, man. Thank you for joining us on the show.
No, thank you for having me, man. Obviously, listener of the show, been following you for a while. And I've been a part of the Real Men University group. And it's been good to not only contribute, but also learn from you and so many other men. And when it comes to today, you know, there's several different perspectives, but I'm glad that you said we're coming from a Christian perspective, because we're both black men. We're both professionals. We're both Americans. Mm-hmm. And depending on which perspective you come from will influence how you see things. But you and I both believe that the Christian perspective and the biblical perspective of how we see this is the right perspective. I'm also glad you said that we don't have all the answers, because I don't want you to listen to me saying, well, Dr. Brad's got all the answers here. No, but I do have a biblical perspective that I try to be intentional about when it comes to what's going on right now, when it, to some of the racial tension that's going on right now.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat that you're in too. So I think that I want the listeners to really understand that where we're coming from is I like the key word you just said, Dr. Brad. You said intentional, an intentional, purposeful, biblical Christian perspective of what God demands and commands of us in this time. And I don't think it's by accident or coincidence that we're in this season. He called us for a time as this.
That's right.
And I think even especially ministering to men, God knew this was coming before we even accepted this call.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to believe that he's expecting us to represent him and be ambassadors for him.
That's right.
Doing this. Now, Dr. Brad, everyone has a story. So let's start with yours. I told them in the intro what you do. But before I even get to your story, I almost forgot already. I didn't ask you your favorite Bible verse. We always ask men when they come on the show, what's their favorite Bible verse that gives them inspiration from the Word of God? I'm just curious, what's yours, man, as a man who is leading men?
Yeah, so, man, that's so tough. And I know I can't be the first person to have said that.
Well, I'll let you know. I'll let you know if you tell me.
In terms of me saying it's tough, because, I mean, sometimes it's seasonal for me. But I think the one that has resonated with me the most and the most consistently is Matthew 6:33.
Wow.
Which is, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all those things shall be given unto you. And so, it's a toss up between that one and Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, and it's interesting because I actually use those for specific things in my life. And Philippians 4:13 is, when I'm worried, when I'm, can I do it? I remember that it's not about me and it's about having my strength in him. And then Matthew 6:33 just tries to help me stay focused and to realize that to be sensitive to the Spirit all the time and putting my faith first in all things and knowing that everything else will be taken care of.
Mm-hmm. Now, I said, wow, Dr. Brad, when you said Matthew 6:33, because that's whenever I have a problem or an issue, we were talking before we came on the air, I mentioned I have a spiritual coach and mentor, a spiritual father to me. His name is Howard Mintz. And every time I go to Howard with a problem, man, I am so sick and tired of him quoting Matthew 6:33. every time I go to him, you got to seek him, Joe. You got to seek him. And for those who don't know, Matthew 6:30, seek ye first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. And that's Howard's answer for everything. Man. Everything. But guess what I realized? Because it's right.
That's right.
Because if he says seek him first, his kingdom and his righteousness, and he didn't say a few things will be added unto you. Sometimes some things will be added unto you.
Right.
He says all things will be added unto you. And last time I checked in the Greek and the Hebrew, all means all. So, all inclusive. So as soon as you said that, Brad, I almost about to cut you off there when you told me that was your favorite Bible verse.
And listen, I can assure you, I don't know Howard. I haven't met Howard. Howard sounds like a great guy. We agree on this scripture. But, I love it when the word is so instructional. I mean, think about that. He says, just seek ye first. And it's so simple. Yeah. Because I'm really not a smart guy. Like I need things to be very simple. And when it's just like, do this and this will happen. Right. I have to take the Bible for its word, which is something that I think a lot of us don't do. I struggle with sometimes actually taking the Bible for what it actually says. Like you said, all means all. And so I love it when it's so instructional like that. And for me, it helps to simplify things for me and just say, just focus here. Don't worry about all that other stuff. It's going to be taken care of.
Yeah. So Howard, shout out to Howard. Howard, okay, I got you. Yeah. But I was getting ready to say before I forgot about asking your favorite Bible verse. Tell us what it was like for you. What's your backstory? Tell us a little bit about your story and how you, before you got started and became a faith-based purpose and performance coach. What was your childhood like growing up? What was that like?
Yeah, so I grew up in Houston, H-Town, Hustle Town.
Oh, boy.
I grew up not too far from Fifth Ward. I grew up in probably, I'd say, lower middle class home. It's funny because I was telling a friend this the other day. You don't really realize how, I guess I could say, rough or hood the neighborhood was that I grew up in until I went to college, and I realized, like, hold up, you didn't experience this? Like, all the people that I was around with, I was like, I guess it was worse than what I thought, but it was just all I knew, I was blessed to have both my mother and father in the house. And I grew up with two older brothers who really mentored me along the way. And my oldest brother is 12 years older than me. So he was almost like a second father to me. And, my two older brothers made some mistakes, but through the grace of God, they were always looking at me saying, you can't make the same mistakes. Like, so they were really my first mentors, were my two older brothers, and they helped keep me out of, trouble, not all trouble, but most trouble. And, when we look at my friends and really kind of who made it out of our hood, our family, really the ones that did the best. And I believe it was because of the guidance. Both my parents were there, and, my brothers were very, like I said, they were very helpful for me to be able to get out of where we lived without, having a, history of going to jail or anything like that. So many other of our friends, either had kids at an early age or, got involved in drugs and violence and went to jail. Well, nobody in our family really kind of, went down that path. So I'm very appreciative of that. But I went from that, we didn't have anyone in our family who really was, college or, professional. My dad was a bus driver. My mom was a bank teller. And I just had men at an early age that I didn't realize until later were really pouring into me and helping me out. But I was an athlete, ended up going to high school, but caught the injury bug, never made anything in basketball. But I went to college. I was so fearful of failing that I studied and did better than I thought I ever could do. And then I had some mentors in college. And long story short, ended up becoming a physician, which was beyond what I ever thought I could have done, particularly from where I came from. And, having had no one in our family who'd really gone after a profession of what I guess most people would consider, pretty successful. And so went down that path and became a physician, married my high school sweetheart in the middle of medical school. And, a lot came true. I became a physician, successful. As you mentioned before, was one of the assistant team physicians for Dallas Mavericks. Missed out on a championship ring because I started working with them the year after they won the championship. But missed out on that deal. But, everything that I went out for happened. And this entire time, the only problem was that I thought I was doing it the whole time.
Yeah.
And so I became very prideful. I became very arrogant, although I would try to say I was humble. Most of what I had, the success that I had reached was really, I thought it was all me. And it basically came to a point that in attempting to achieve more in my career and attempting to start a business and be successful in that business, I found myself, the more hungry I became for success, the more it came at the expense of being less of the man that I've always wanted to be. And I found myself, distant from my wife and children. I found myself, having values and things that were completely far away from who I wanted to be as a Christian, as a father, as a husband, as a friend, and just really got way off the beaten path until finally just got to a point where I said, I got to come back to God, because I've tried to do everything I can to be more and more successful. And the more I keep trying, the more painful my life becomes. And, at that point, through the grace of God, got involved with a great church and started going to men's Bible studies, started having some mentors in my life from a spiritual perspective. Life changed drastically, and then saw that I needed to get clarity on my purpose, because there was still just something else out there for me beyond what my career was doing to help people. I just felt like there was something of greater impact I was supposed to do, and got clarity on that purpose. And now that's what I do outside of my clinic, is that I help high achieving professional men pivot from their career to their calling. And so that's been great. It's been fantastic. But as it relates to, what we're talking about today, I have, I live my life in the hood around, around Black folks, around Hispanic folks, Ended up going to college around a lot of white folks. One of my absolute best friends, who was in my wedding and just a great human being, is white. And, and so now in the professional world, I deal with all types of races. And so what we're talking about today is extremely important because I deal with people from a different color as patients. I deal with people as the same color as patients, business partners, my partners in my clinic, the other physicians I work with. And it's a little different now after George Floyd.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
And people are trying to figure out what can they do to help, particularly some of my white brothers and sisters are trying to figure out like, what can I do? And I think hopefully this show, we can provide some, at least a path or a way of thinking that of maybe what we can all do, not just, our white brothers, but also some of our Black brothers as well.
Right. And Brad, I tell you, we talked before we came on the air, and it's so funny how you can grow up in different parts of the country, different time periods, and have some of the same struggles, different situations, but same struggles. And I was joking, but really wasn't joking with you when I told you before. I said, because based on the work that you do, I said, man, where were you when I was coming up, man?
Right.
Because, our stories are so similar. The difference is, and this is a cautionary tale for you guys out there listening, we both traveled a similar path, except I crashed and I burned. Yeah. And Dr. Brad had enough sense to say, okay, I need to get some help before I crash and burn. But I just think it's great. And that's why I want to eventually bring you back on the show so we can talk more about the work that you do with men, the work that we do with men, and what we're doing to kind of help them in where men are need the help the most. But right. It was a great segue, though, that you just gave as we get into talking about this topic of racism and race in America. Because of your unique practice, what you do as a physician, you get to be, you're exposed, whether you like it or not, to diversity. That's into right. different cultures. Same thing with me in the background in education. I had no choice. I'm going to be exposed in education to teaching all types, work with all types of different people. But so let's kind of pivot a little bit. I'm going to use your word. We're going to pivot a little bit. Right. As I mentioned earlier, I asked the question in Real Men University, what do you think it will take to effectively fight racism in America? And Dr. Brad, you shared 6 ideas that I wanted to discuss with you, not only as a leader of men and being an American, but also as a Black man living in America and being a Black professional. So let's start with the first. And I told you before, even if it could be, even if it's one of those conversations, well, this is what I think, Joe, but what do you think? Right. We can go back and forth because I really want to get your perspective because I know mine, but I want to get yours because I agree with a lot that you have to say. And the first thing you mentioned is that we need to recognize that racism is real and it exists. Now, where do you think we're falling short as men, Black and white, when it comes to recognizing this?
Well, first of all, let me say this when it comes to these 6 answers. I need people to understand I'm human, and it is not unoften that my flesh perspective will be the first thing that happens.
Right.
And that these 6 answers are after running those thoughts through the filter of biblical and Christian principles. Mm-hmm. So don't think that I didn't have, and this is me being fully transparent, when I first saw what happened to George Floyd, that I looked at that picture from a Black man's perspective and got upset and angry. That was initial. Mm-hmm. And then, I started having some level of anger and animosity. And, oh man, again, why do we have to do this? And so I need to make sure that it's clear that those thoughts did happen. And I think to a certain degree, it's normal depending on what side you're on. But the question is, how are you going to react? And are you going to internalize these thoughts and try to come at it from a different perspective other than just anger, right? And just that first fleshly view. So as great as these things may sound, this was after the hey, let me put on the biblical perspective of this, which I think is important because I think some people might be in that place still. I don't know. They might be thinking, right. Yeah, I'm angry, I'm upset. And I get it. I completely get it. but this is after looking at this through the lens of the Christian perspective. But
and Dr. Brad, let me interrupt you for a second, because you're absolutely right. Because I love the fact that you just said that, because my initial reaction was the same way. It was anger, and I was in tears. And I happened to be with my 24-year-old son, and I was in tears. I would not let him even watch it. And like you said, that initial emotion. But then, of course, as we do as Christian men, when we don't have answers, we go to the one who does have the answer.
That's right.
And say, God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to respond? What do you want me, how do you want me to communicate? What should I do next? And so what you're saying is absolutely right, because some people may not be there yet. They may still be, if you look at what are the stages of grief,
yes,
that they may still be in the angry phase.
That's right.
But eventually, after you go through those phases, you get to the point that, wow, I have to now respond and not just react. So I hate to interrupt you, Dr. Brett, but you're right on point. So I'm glad that you stated that in the beginning. So that's awesome.
And I think it's important, because probably one of the biggest things that I could share today is that, number one, if that's where you are, I get it, it's okay. But there's also got to be a desire to move and to grow and move forward. And me even saying this, that I've been able to step back, be aware, and say, okay, what's the Christian perspective? That took time.
Yeah.
Okay. And so my relationship with God, as that's grown, that time lapse between initial reaction and how I really want to, from reaction to actually responding, has gotten much shorter, to where God comes in between that time. So I encourage all men, continue to build that relationship with God, because that reaction time where God can actually be put in the middle of that is going to get shorter for you, which is good, which is what we all want.
Right.
But so yeah, number one, recognizing that racism is real and exists. You have to identify and recognize there's a problem in order to start to resolve the problem, in order to fix the problem. And I think that there may be a lack of awareness that racism still exists, and some people just may not be aware of it. And, as Black men, we are probably more aware of it because we experience it.
Right.
I experience it more than I care to admit to, but it has to be an awareness on both sides, for our white brothers to realize it's happening, even if they're not directly doing it. They just have to be aware that it's a problem. And all you have to do is look at the numbers. Because a lot of people are like, well, I don't know, because it may not be in their world. And I get it. That's okay. But when you look at the numbers, there's a disproportionate amount of Black men who are killed by white police officers. And when I say disproportionate, I mean that. I mean, like, when you account for the fact that, yes, there are less Black people in America, and you account for even the crime that they're doing, why they're being pulled over, there's still a disproportionate amount. And that's just, from the police officer and pulling over someone perspective. But when you look at also the numbers of, if a Black man has a 4-year degree, that same 4-year degree as a white male, he will get paid significantly less on average, whenever they start working. So, and these are just a couple of examples. They're just there are a lot of other numbers. The numbers don't lie. Right. And so, the numbers suggest that there is racial inequality. There is racism that is still a problem and exists. And we won't be able to resolve the issue if everybody doesn't recognize, there's something to actually fix here if nobody thinks that there's a problem.
I heard James Patterson once say, he says, if you ignore the elephant in the room, so if you keep ignoring that elephant, it's going to turn into a lion and devour everybody in the house. I think that's what it comes down to. Racism is that way. We have to at least acknowledge it. And you looked at it from the statistic point of view. And I wonder if you can relate to this. I travel all over the country, and especially as a speaker, and I've gone to places where I'm the only Black thing in the place.
That's right.
I joke sometimes that the only thing was us is just me and the microphone. The only thing that's Black in the whole place. Right. And so as I travel, and I've said this, and I've told my white brothers this, but I don't think they understand it. But I'm going to see if you get this, Dr. Brad. I said, I've gone places where I'm the only person of color and never felt my color. I've gone places where it's been diverse, but it's
Yes.
predominantly white.
Yes.
And I felt my color.
Yes.
And I wish I can articulate it, but I
That's
said,
right.
maybe it's just because, like you said, I've experienced so much, so I know the difference. And I can't put my finger on it and I can't prove it in a court of law, but I'm thinking, wow, something's not right in this environment. I feel it. Have you ever experienced that, Dr. Brad?
Oh, yes. So first of all, I mean, I'd say as I've continued my professional education and advancement of my career, the more that happens, the more I am the only in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Even in in clinical practice, and we've moved out here to the suburbs now. So
Mm-hmm.
it is very often that we are the only. But despite that, depending on the environment, yes, I will feel that when I walk in. I mean, I can tell you just this past weekend, my wife and I, we got to get out. Me and the kids, we're about to drive each other crazy with the whole, quarantine. And even though we take a walk every day, we're like, look, we just got to get out. So we drove down to a small area where her father has a lake house to spend some time there. And there's no Wi-Fi. I mean, this place is off the grid.
Mm-hmm.
But we needed to go to the store and I needed Wi-Fi. So I'm like, moving around everywhere trying to find a place for Wi-Fi. And I walk into a restaurant. And it was one of those situations where, the music almost stopped.
I've been there. And it's not funny when it's happening, but
right.
you recognize. But go ahead.
And I was just like, and I asked, I said, hey, you guys have some Wi-Fi? I'd be happy to order some food. I just need to use some Wi-Fi. Oh, yeah. And it was all okay, but you feel it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You feel the energy, which is like, yeah, I'm trying to do what I got to do as quick as I can get out of here. But yeah, I definitely understand what you're talking about.
You mentioned at one of your points there, I recognize that racism is not a black or white issue, but it's a black and white issue. Now, I would think most people would agree with you on that, but a lot of black people I know think that only white people can be racist because white people are the ones responsible for setting up the system that oppresses people of color.
Yeah.
Why do you say it's a black and white issue?
Well, one, because it always takes two to tango. It always takes two to tango. And I'm not saying that it's it's black people's fault why there's racism. I'm not saying. What I'm saying more is that in order to resolve this, it's going to take both of us in order to get this better. It's been so long. A friend of mine made a point to me. It was over 400 years, almost 500 years of intentional oppression, slavery of black people. We're only about 50 years into turning that boat around from the civil rights movement, if you think about that. And that was intentional oppression and slavery. And we're only of almost 500 years, Dr. Joe.
Yeah.
We're now 50 years into trying to turn that around. There are generational thoughts within black people that feel that they are, that white people are superior. There are thoughts within that are just deep-seated generational, where some black folks believe that they just might not be worthy of success, or there are things that we all have to work on in order to resolve this. And white folks, we have to work with them as well. I've seen some posts where some black folks are saying like, no, this is a white issue, meaning like white people, you need to fix this. Like you need to fix this because you cause it. And I just have never seen that anytime I point the finger and say it's all one person, no matter what the problem is, has it ever resolved well. So when I say black and white, I say we both have a responsibility, okay? Yes, I realize that white America may have contributed significantly to the fact that, there was slavery, oppression, and racism, and it continues to go on. But we also, as Black people, have a responsibility to also have some grace. And I know my Black brothers don't want to hear this. You know, I should have said that first. Hey, man, hold on. I'm about to say something. Because so many people will say, well, haven't we just been doing that this whole time? And, that's when I got to go to the Bible and say, biblically, 70 times 7. I have to forgive. And then the reason why I'm able to go to this biblical perspective and to a spiritual perspective is because, man, I hurt God every day. I'm a sinner, and I can't look at myself any better or worse than a police officer who had his knee on that guy's neck. I know people don't want to hear this, Dr. Joe. I know they don't. Yeah. I don't even want to say it to a certain degree. You
right. I know what you mean. Yeah.
But I have to say, you know what? I'm giving grace every single day.
Yeah.
And I just got to say this, he's lost. He's lost soul. My brother was playing devil's advocate one day. He was saying, how do we know the guy's racist? Because he put a knee on a Black man. I don't know if he, do we know that he, got up that morning saying, "Ooh, man, today is the day that put a knee on a Black man's neck and kill him." You know what I mean?
Right.
And he was just playing devil's advocate. I say, you know what? You're right, man. I don't know whether he's racist or not, but I know no matter what, it was wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't want to condemn the man. I realize he justice needs to be served, but I also need to offer grace. So, and understanding. So there's things on both sides, Black and white, that we all need to work on in order to reconcile. I can't point at white people and say, hey, man, you got to go fix this problem so that we can have a better life.
Right.
I don't know.
A friend of mine, she was telling me, she says, she works as a psychologist. She says, Joe, I don't care how you look at it. Blame plus shame would never equal change.
Yes.
Blame
you
plus
said
shame.
This on a recent show. This was a recent show I was listening to. Yes, yeah, I agree.
Blame plus shame will never equal change. And that's not something we, like you said, from the Black community, we don't always want to hear that because, man, we've been given grace, we've been given forgiveness. And you're right, looking at it from a biblical perspective, we are to continue to give more grace.
That's right.
And more forgiveness. But I'm going to now speak, and I want you to help me out. I'm going to speak to the white people out there who, because you're right, it's going to take both of us, Dr. Brad, to work on this. But a lot of my white counterparts, they're like, well, shouldn't you guys be over this by now? Shouldn't Black people be over this? We didn't do it to them. And the way I get some of my white friends to understand, because they know my backstory and my background, and everybody loves children. And I always use this as an example, and maybe I'm using it wrong, Dr. Brad, but you can correct me. I said, if a child was sexually abused, because I was a child that was sexually abused. If you knew a child was sexually abused, you didn't abuse them.
Yep.
But the kid was abused. How would you treat that child? You extend compassion? Will you seek the comfort? Will you try to understand? Or would you tell that child, just get over it?
Oh,
I didn't do it to you. That happened so far back, Joe, in your child. Now, here I am, a grown man.
That's right.
Old now, with kids, could possibly potentially later on in a few years have grandkids.
That's right.
Not one person, Dr. Brad, has ever told me, Joe, I heard about your abuse. How come you haven't gotten over it yet?
Oh, wow.
Why don't you just forget, man? Leave the past in the past. But I have been able to get past it.
That's right.
But I haven't forgotten it.
That's right.
And it has an impact. So I tell men, Black and white, that your past may explain you, but it doesn't excuse you.
That's right.
But for the people who didn't experience it, show some compassion.
Yes. Yes.
No different. The compassion that they pour out to me, Dr. Brad, is amazing.
That's right.
But yet, when it comes to this thing about racism, not so much.
And that's the unawareness. That's the lack of awareness that some of our white brothers have out there, is that they may not understand just how much of an effect it has on us. A white friend of mine was saying the other day, he'll never know what it's like to get pulled over and wonder, am I gonna make it out this thing safely? You
Yeah.
know, he's never going to leave an interview wondering, did I not get this interview because of my race? He's never going to have these experiences that influence life, behavior. You know, we all have struggles. I get it. We all have baseline struggles. I mean, life is going to have circumstances. Added to that, we have a racial inequality and barriers that we have, that we have to get past. And even though, yes, I realize it happened a long time ago, it's really not that long time ago.
Right.
I was having a conversation with my dad the other day. I mean, he remembers, Dr. Martin Luther King, and I mean, he's experienced, racism, significantly. And so it has an effect, and to be unaware of it or to be insensitive to it is a problem. And if anything that's happened with the whole George Floyd thing is that there is now more of an awareness. And I think, at least, from my white brothers, to be able to ask the question, am I missing something?
Right.
Have I maybe said something that I had no idea? It's really starting to give some clarity on, before I say something, before I do something, let me think about it. Could this potentially be harming folks? And to me, awareness is great, because now that you can do something about it. The whole line of ignorance is bliss. No, to me, the better and the more aware we are, the more we'll be able to find resolution and reconciliation.
That kind of goes into your fourth point, which, because in order to do that, to be aware, you got to be curious. You have to want to know and desire. And you mentioned on your fourth point that curiosity and interest in seeing from the other race's perspective is necessary. And that sounds good, but what does that actually look like in real life, Dr. Brad? How can we start getting a different perspective from others?
Well, curiosity, I think, is it. I think before we condemn, we have to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
It is easy for me to condemn that police officer. It's easy for me to condemn the two men who ran down Ahmaud Arbery and
Right.
killed him. But I don't know their history. But I am curious,
Mm-hmm.
what prompted them to do that?
Right.
What prompted him to do that? Because, see, if I'm curious, I might be able to come to an understanding, not in agreement with what they did.
Right.
But I might be able to come to an understanding. The best point I can make of this is college. I went to college, great friend of mine. He and I, and listen, we were from two ends of the spectrum here. I was listening to Tupac, Biggie,
Mm-hmm.
I was hip hop and the whole nine when I got, I was lifting weights, the whole thing. I guess you could say I was an angry black man going to going to college. And I didn't go to an HBCU, so
Mm-hmm.
I was really minority. And my friend, who I ended up meeting, he was country bumpkins, man. I mean, Wranglers, boots, and country music.
Mm-hmm.
And we became the best of friends. And further on in our friendship, he became very open and candid with me. He says, you kind of messing me up. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, you're black and you study, and
Oh, goodness.
and he's like, this is like, I've never really experienced this. But I could tell there was a genuineness in what he was saying. It wasn't like a backhand compliment. He was just like
Right.
you got your stuff together. He said, the only black person I knew growing up was the guy who sold us weed.
Mm.
And that gave me perspective. I was like, wow. Before meeting me, he probably had a perspective of what most black people like, because that was all he was exposed to.
Right.
But because he was forced to know me better, and we grew this great relationship, and I love him, absolutely love him to this day. He would get upset when he saw racism happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that, at least for me, gave me perspective. Like, wow, you know what? some of our white brothers just have not been exposed to enough of us to realize that, you know what, not all Black people are a certain way, or to paint their views of how they may see us, and vice versa, right? But we need to be curious, and we need to kind of put ourselves in a place where we get exposed to the other race. You know, a good friend of mine, I go to a predominantly Black church, but he's one of our leaders and he's white. And, you know, he was telling us his perspective. He adopted a Black child. And just that alone, he's like, I didn't know. I mean, he didn't know what life was going to be like for him. I mean, his son, when he started driving, started getting pulled over, and he was like, what? And like, it just didn't make sense. But again, perspective.
Right.
So we got to start looking at things from the other person's perspective, being curious so that we can come to understand, but not to agree. I then understood why my friend may have thought a certain way. It made me then see that, you know what? Someone who may say something insensitive right next to me, they probably just don't know. And maybe they've just been, you know, raised in a household where maybe something was taught. Who knows? I don't know. But I'm at least open to understanding the other side, but I don't agree. I may not agree. But then with that curiosity, it can lead to maybe creating some change and saying, hey, well, I'm curious. What makes you think that? If somebody says something, hey, I'm curious. Why do you say that?
Yeah, why do you believe that? Yeah.
Yeah, why do you believe that?
You know, Dr. Brad, our stories are so similar because my best friend and roommate from college was a self-proclaimed redneck from Alabama, you know, and we became the best of friends. We're still friends to this day. You're talking about a 30-year friendship.
Right.
And we had both of us had a curiosity. And it's so funny because he had never been exposed to a lot of Black people. He played football, so he saw him on the football field, but he never lived with a Black guy before. And I mean, we used to have these talks, and we didn't always agree on everything, but we loved each other, and we were willing to talk about it. And I remember him telling me, he says, Joe, racism is not as bad as you think. He said, I keep hearing you and Black people, you guys keep saying it's not as bad as you think. Don't you see things getting better? Now, you're talking about in the late 80s, early 90s, things are getting better. But don't you know, after I graduated, and I graduated about maybe a semester before he did, he says, you were wrong. I told you, Joe, racism is as bad as you thought it was. He says, it's worse. I said, what are you talking about? Now, this is a white guy telling me this. Yeah. He says, because I didn't know until I started living with you how bad it was. He said, based on what he heard from his white friends. Right. He said, all these years I've known them, I didn't know a lot of them thought that way. I didn't know. He said, until I lived with you, he said, it changed my life based on my friends, because I started to realize, wow, that's what they think. Wow, I didn't know they thought that. And we can be so blind to, but I wanted to ask you this, and only Black people can be talking about this right now. And this is just me, Dr. Brad. Maybe you might be different, but I actually have a problem whenever I hear some of my white friends say, Joe, I just don't see color. I don't see color. And I know what they mean by that. I get it. But it bothers me because it's like they're not acknowledging my color, the color of my skin. Because when I see them, Dr. Brad, I do see color.
That's right.
When I see Black people, I see color. When I see Asian, Latino people, I see color. But I don't allow that, what I see in their color, to shape how I treat them as a man. So I would like to know, what's your perspective on when a lot of your white counterparts would tell you, say, you know what, Brad, I love you. You love me, man. When I see you, man, I'm not a racist because I don't see color. What's your take on that, man? It just bothers me when I hear it.
No, I agree. And I have to really more or less say, like you said, I think I know what they're trying to say.
I know what they're trying to say. Yeah.
Hey, I see you for the person you are. But I want you to, not suppress what you see, but really address what you see.
Yes, I love that.
Say, hey, you might say, okay, well, it's a Black man, but I mean, I love him regardless.
Right.
I love him because of who he is. And so, for something like that, I think what they're trying to say really is, I love you no matter what your color is. but not necessarily I don't see color. And what's funny is I think a lot of things and the way we say things are probably going to start changing just because of some of the more awareness and being more aware of some of the insensitivity of things that we say. Because you're not the first person I've heard say this.
Okay.
This is not the first conversation I've had about that comment. It's saying, well, I don't see color. It's like, no, I want you to see that. I'm proud that I'm Black.
Right.
I want you to see that and love me because of it, Yeah.
And because like you said, I know the intention behind it.
Right.
But that brings up another point, and I would love to hear your take on this too, is because my heart breaks with my white friends right now.
Yeah.
As much as I know we're dealing with the anger, the rage of what we see, the injustice of it. But this is not new to us.
Right.
I've experienced this growing up as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older, I went through it. But I get concerned for some of my white friends who I know truly love us.
Yes.
But yet they're scared and they're frightened and afraid they're being painted with this brush that they must be a racist too, or they don't understand their quote white privilege and all this. What advice would you give to white people as a Black man for the ones who have a sincere heart to understand that, well, we're in this together? I do want to know. I do want to understand. What advice would you give them to allow them to continue to live their life without holding their breath around Black people all the time and walking on eggshells? Because I really want them to be free to be themselves around me, not try to play a role that they think is acceptable to me. What would you say to them, Dr. Brad?
Yeah, because, depending on who you talk to and, what you look at, the question is this creating more separation than it is anything? That's a great question, because I think where some of our white brothers fall is that they have great hearts, but they just lacked maybe how significant some of the racism is. And so now they're seeing it, and they may see that, maybe I've been insensitive this whole time. And that can get uncomfortable. And much like you said, I do feel for my white brothers and sisters, because it is getting uncomfortable for them right now. And anytime you see somebody get uncomfortable, it's like, I don't.
You getting uncomfortable, making me uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly. So, so I do feel for them because I know they're getting uncomfortable. However, I would say, listen, if your heart is in the right place, and if you honestly feel like, maybe I've gotten some things wrong over time, again, just seek understanding, ask it. I think it's okay to be curious,
Yes.
Before giving an opinion. I think it's okay to ask, like, how can I help? What can I do? I think curiosity with an intent to truly understand won't come off in a way that, would, someone who's Black would, and I can't speak for everybody.
Right.
But I think if you come, curious with an intent to truly understand, I think Black folks would understand, because we want to be understood. Part of the reason why there are the protests is we want it to be made aware, like, hey, this is what's going on. And so, be curious to understand, so that way, like we talked about before, if we can understand that it is a problem, when you see injustice or something happening, you can now recognize it, and you can say something or do something or provide encouragement or whatever the case may be. And so if you feel that in your heart, I'm sorry it's uncomfortable, but part of it is necessary. And so that's why, even though I know from my white brothers and sisters, they might be uncomfortable right now, I also realize that it's necessary.
You know what, Dr. Brett, what pops in my head is, because we always like to look at specific instances. Okay, this is dealing with race, but I like to put it in the context of dealing with life in general. And it's kind of like, to me, it's the equivalent of somebody who just lost a loved one. You ever notice how you get uncomfortable? I don't know what to say. They just lost. How do I say Brad just lost his wife? And what do I say? And you walk that line of what do I do? But what you just said makes perfect sense, that if we're intentional and we're curious to ask, so how are you doing, man? Are you okay, Dr. Brad? Is there anything I can do? What do you need from me right now? Then it comes across as being sincere and not being suspicious.
Yes.
And so that's why I try to look at the broader sense of it. How would I treat somebody in this situation? And so I think that's great advice that you're giving. But I don't want, I have one more question for you because we're running out of time, but I don't want to let my white friends off the hook too easily today either, because you mentioned about being curious, but at the same time, we need to take action. We need to do some things. And I love a lot of my friends, man, I'm talking about my white friends. They'll say, man, I really want to understand. I really want to be more inclusive. I really want to see different perspectives. And they have the greatest intentions, but I said, but what are you doing to interact with people who don't look like you? I said, give me your phone. Give me your phone. Yeah. Let me look at your most frequently dialed numbers.
Right.
Now, nobody made you call all those people. You chose to call all those people. How come they all look the same?
Right.
How come I can look at your phone and know what race you are? How can I look at your phone and know what religion you are? Right. If you really are intentional about knowing about other people, you will make an intention to know other people. And so you're going to have to, like we just said, Dr. Brett, get uncomfortable by meeting people who don't look like you,
right?
Who don't believe the same things you do. Now, people like to think we're closed-minded as Christians because we don't get outside of our Christian bubble. I like meeting people who are Muslim, who are atheists, who are agnostic, who are Buddhist, because I'm curious.
That's right.
And guess what? I found out that they're not even angry towards me because they're like, wow, you really want to know? Yeah. So they ask me questions about my faith.
Right.
So I don't want to let my friends off the hook thinking, hey, because you have a great heart, that's enough. No, now put some feet to that heart.
Right.
Do something that you're not comfortable doing. I do a segment on Moody Radio here in Chattanooga, and I was on this morning, and I was talking about how to build friendships. And I said, you have to be intentional about at least reaching out, maybe once a week, take somebody out to lunch or a cup of coffee. Now, before COVID-19, that's what I normally do. I've been doing that now probably for the last 8 years. Wow. And I've built this network of this diverse network of friends who don't look like me and sound like me because I've been intentional about it. What would you say to that person who has the greatest heart, Dr. Brad, but they're not doing anything about it? What tip or idea could you give them on stepping outside of their bubble?
Yeah, well, first I'm going to tell them, first I agree with you because it's interesting, we talk about being the only everywhere we go. I mean, that's just the reality, and it's hard to have perspective without getting in that person's shoes. We can try. We can say, hey, you know what? I think I can kind of understand. I think I kind of understand where you're coming from. But, we talked about my white friend who goes to our Black church. He talks about how initially he felt a little weird. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, this is how we feel. And this is what we're exposed to every day because we're the only. And so when you put in a situation where, you are not the majority, it's going to feel a little different.
Right.
And it's funny. He talks about this the first time he met our pastor. This is my white friend that goes to our church. Our pastor's Black, and after church was over, he went up to me. He's like, "Man, this was a great service." Mm-hmm. He's like, "Oh, what'd you like so much about it?" He's like, "Oh man, the crowds, it's so diverse." Now it's a predominantly Black church,
right?
And my pastor said, were we in the same service? But I agree, man. I think we have to start being intentional about mixing the circles and being okay with that. Because what will probably happen is they'll realize, it's actually this is nothing what I thought it was.
It's not exactly what I thought it was.
This is nothing I thought it was. And so I know our church and here in Dallas, we're trying to start an initiative called the Unity Table, where the fifth Saturday of every month that has a fifth Saturday, they're calling people to invite someone out to dinner of a different race, or have dinner with someone of a different race. So that might be something that people can do or kind of plug into, or at least kind of have a framework in their mind of, I believe if you don't have a intentional system or something, it's probably not going to happen. If you just, oh man, that sounds good. So yeah, I would challenge to say, start off monthly, start off quarterly, something. Just being very intentional about saying, I'm going to put somebody on the calendar. We're going to just go grab coffee or lunch.
And this is not even just a white thing, because Dr. Brad, I put myself in positions, and you got to know me. I'm such an introvert. People don't believe that I'm introverted.
Oh man, I believe it. I believe it, because I'm the same way.
Are you? Okay, because so you understand that. Because I'd rather not be around a lot of people, but I know that that's to my own detriment. So I force myself to do things I want to do. Dr. Brad, I grew up in the hood in Miami. I got a friend who wants me to go camping and going out hiking. Now, that dude ain't black. That dude's white. I'm like, dude, I don't like being in the outdoors. I don't even roll down the windows in my car when I'm driving.
That's hilarious.
But I accept it because I don't want to do it. Because how can I stretch myself if I'm not willing to make myself uncomfortable? So of course he's holding me to that. So I've got to be intentional about going out camping with this dude or going hiking with him. Right. And I think it was last month, my project manager, she wanted me to speak for this group. She handles all our speaking requests. I said, okay, what's the group? She said, it's a group of women, right? I said, all right, it's a group of women. All the women were white, and I'm the guest speaker. And she said, Joe, you don't have to do it if you don't want to do it. I said, no, I'll do it. And I did it because it was going to make me uncomfortable to do it.
Wow.
How does a black man speak to all white women
and get the point across?
And get the point across that they can relate. And do you know, Dr. Brad, man, they were in tears. They start friending me on Facebook.
Wow.
But the thing is, like you said, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Right.
So I had to be intentional. So yes, I'm putting this mandate to my white friends, but I'm telling you, we still have to do it as black people as well. But if this thing ever is going to shift, somebody has to make that move. And to me, love is saying, I'll go first.
Yeah.
I'll go first. Sir. And I'm asking my white friends that you got a lot of black people in trauma over racism in society, over generational things that they overcome. Extend it. I mean, be the first to say, hey, to make that step forward. So this will be the last question, because I'm going to go to the last thing that you mentioned. And you said that we need to be reminded that Jesus is the standard, that Jesus gives infinite grace and love to us, regardless of what our sin is. Therefore, we should offer the same grace and love to all others. And now that seems to be very obvious based on our beliefs as Christians, as believers. So why do you think so many of us as black and white, all colors, have a hard time practicing grace and forgiveness? You mentioned this earlier. Why do you think we have a hard time doing it if we know that's the foundation of our faith?
Well, I think we've been taught that it's the foundation, Dr. Joe, but you've got to truly experience it and understand it. Mm-hmm. Because once you truly understand what Jesus did for us, it's hard not to start to extend some of the same grace.
Right.
Now that means that first you have to recognize that, we're not perfect. I'm not perfect. And when I recognize that, I'm a sinner, and he did what he did on the cross. He did so many things that are beyond my comprehension so that my sin can be forgiven, and that I can have a savior to rely on, so that I'm not living in sin, so that I'm not, doomed to, eternity outside of his kingdom. I say, wow, and not only does he do that for me, he does that for everybody who believes in him.
Right.
I can't imagine getting hurt every day by someone different every day, sometimes the same thing every day. Mm-hmm. For me, look, I can only speak for me. Look, sometimes it's every day. For years, it was the same thing. Mm-hmm. And he say, look, it's okay. And at the end of the day, racism is sin. Intentional racism is sinful. What we saw with, the police officer's knee on George Floyd's neck is sinful, whether that was racist or not.
Right.
And we have to see it as sin before we see it as a black man did this or a white man did that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to care just as much for George Floyd's soul, may his soul rest in peace, hopefully he's in heaven,
Mm-hmm.
as I do for the officer who had his knee on him.
Amen. Amen.
And I just have to know that I'm no better than him.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people like, oh man, and for some reason we'll grade these sins on how bad they are.
Yeah, thinking God grade on a curve.
But
sliding scale, the sin sliding scale, right?
That's right. But once you can truly understand, once you really understand, like, hold on, every sin, everything I've done, currently doing, and will do, he said, no, like, it's all good. Even murder, even, and so when you understand that, you're like, wow, it doesn't stop with me. The grace doesn't stop here. The grace has to continue to be extended. And so even though racism is a sin, we got to start looking at this thing from the eye of God, from the eye of Jesus, and say, you know what, it is all bad. And the only way to truly reconcile is going to have change. We have to change a heart in everybody, meaning grace on black folks in to say, I offer you grace. And white folks even say, you know what, you guys who are rioting, even though I may not agree, I forgive you. And understanding. That's the only way some of this stuff's going to change. I don't think forcing our way to try to change policy is going to do it. I think the hearts of people who create policy is what's going to have to do it.
Amen.
And so, but not until you truly understand that relationship with God and what he's done for us and Jesus Christ, what he did on the cross, I think it's going to be hard for people to see it from that perspective.
Wow. Man, we're talking to my guest, Dr. Brad Ballard, who's the author, and he's a speaker, he's a performance coach for men. Dr. Brad, what a great way to close out the show. I can't believe the time went by so fast. We didn't even get to the man-up questions, but I told you there's a possibility that we wouldn't do that. But I think it's safe to say, Dr. Brad, that this won't be the last time you're going to be on our show, because there's so much, not only that we have in common, but there's so much that we can discuss about men's issues. And I think you did a great job. I think that at least God will be pleased with how we conducted this interview, because no, we don't have all the answers. We're not even experts on this topic, but what we do know is that we're going to be held accountable to the Creator. At least if you are a believer, if you consider yourself a Christian. And we are men of action, but we also are men of mercy and grace, because we need it so much. So I'd like to thank my guest, Dr. Brad Ballard, for joining us today and for being so gracious with the time. Dr. Brad, thank you for joining us on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And if there's anything I could encourage the men who are listening to this is, just continue to seek him daily in the form of prayer and the word. And I'll tell you, there's no way you will go wrong with that. And so, Dr. Joe, thank you so much for the platform that you've created to be able to help and encourage men and to be able to talk openly about things like race and reconciliation and getting men, which I believe is one of the foundations of what we need, is just, stronger men of God out here, living on purpose. And the fact that you're carrying the torch to be able to lead men to that. I pray that God continue to strengthen you and do what it is that he has in store for you, which I believe is going to be remarkable things. And I look forward to working with you to do that exact same thing.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brad. I remember what a friend of mine, Jim Ramos, said. He says, when a man gets it, everybody wins.
Yes.
And that's what we're in the fight for doing. We're trying to fight for, so men can win, so everybody can win. This nation, our homes, our families, this country, the world can win. But Dr. Brad, quickly for our listeners, if they wanted to find out more about you, what you're doing in ministry, what you're working on, how can they contact you? What would be the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to my website. That would be drbradmd.com. That's drbradmd.com. And there I've got a couple resources to be able to, help men find their purpose and so forth. And then just as it relates to this topic that we're talking about, me and a good friend of mine, a life coach named Greg McKinney, we had a discussion about this exact thing. Again, just coming from a Christian perspective, and that's on my Facebook business page, which if you just look up Dr. Brad MD on Facebook, you'll be able to find it. You'll be able to find that hour-long communication between him and I. again, theming some of the exact same points we talked about here.
Mm-hmm.
If you want a perspective from a life coach and kind of how to go from, hurt to healing in this whole process. So.
Right. And what we'll do is we'll put that in the show notes as well, Dr. Brad, so they'll have access to that. And guys, please do us a favor. This is so important. Take about 30 seconds to go with iTunes and rate the program for us. Let us know what you thought about Dr. Brad and our conversation today and our take on this topic, because that's the best way to help us get this program in the hands, ears, and hearts of men just like you. So even if you disagree, we'd love to hear your comments. And please don't keep us a secret. Share us with your friends. So until next time, I'm Dr. Joe Martin with your man builder with realmenconnect.com, reminding you that we are males by birth, but we are men by choice. So each and every day, choose to be the man that God has called and created you to be, because a male is a terrible thing to waste. So until next time, stay strong, stay blessed, and as always, stay in God's grip.